open to the public.
Stampede.
Discussion become part of public minutes then?
No idea.
Decision?
Okay, I just want to inform anybody in attendance that anybody in the public gallery can use your mobile devices through the Wi-Fi connection, and all devices should be muted. The password details are available on the gallery rules for anyone wanting to connect to the Assembly's Wi-Fi network. 3G and 4G should not be used, and no recordings or photographs are to be taken. Members are also asked to ensure that their electronic devices are switched to mute mode to ensure quality of sound recording. Okay, are members content? Okay, so any members aware of any apologies?
Chair, Ross Hussey sends his apologies in London for a National Police commemoration.
Nothing else?
No further apologies, Chair, at this stage.
Okay, I just want to remind members at this stage that you're obliged to declare any relevant financial or other interest at each committee member as applicable. Okay, moving on then to the draft minutes of proceedings of the 14th of September 2016. I refer members to the draft minutes of the 29th of June 2016 on pages 5 to 14 of the main pack.
June, sorry, September.
Yes.
Sorry, Chair, that should read the
I
14th
think
of
it's the 14th
September.
of September.
Yes.
Yeah. So pages 5, 11 are members content that that's an accurate reflection of the meeting? Just want to return to matters arising then. Page 4 of the table of papers, outstanding requests for information from the department. Members will notice that there's a number of requests we've made from the department that we've not yet received. If members are content, we can write to the department to urge a response to those outstanding correspondence cases. Content? Yep. Okay, so we'll move on to the next matter, which is the Department of Finance written briefing on defamation. This was requested, I think, in one of the June meetings, so we've now received that. I refer members to the following papers. There's a briefing paper from the Department of Finance on defamation, pages 15 to 17 of the main pack. There's also an extract in the table papers of a report, the report referenced in the Department of Finance paper by Dr. Andrew Scott, page 14 of the table pack. Not sure if members want to raise any issues about that at the moment. Yes, Philip.
Chair, I'd like to propose that we write to the Minister to ask if he has brought the consultation paper, the Scott paper, to the Executive yet. If not, is it his intention to do so at a reasonably early position? And if he's not minded to do so, will he remove the barriers to a private member's bill, so that this legislation can be brought before the House as quickly as possible? It's been sitting there now in terms of the consultation for 18 months. And as we know, the main piece of legislation, the 2013 Act from England and Wales, has taken place a number of years ago. So we're now in the place where we are long behind the updates in legislation. And I think the consultation paper that is before us today shows a consensus, basically, that there needs to be change, and an amended version of the 2013 Act seems to be what is being proposed. So, Chair, I'd like to formally propose that we do that, please.
Yes, I think the briefing paper is useful. We can certainly write to the Minister to see what he intends to do. You know, I think the two, it's interesting, sort of two of the key changes, you know, were perhaps less supported in terms of that report. The first is to move from harm being caused to serious harm being caused, which is a much higher test. So despite harm being caused to the individual, you would not be able to sue to defamation unless you could prove that it was serious harm. I think the other issue, which caused some controversy, was around largely within the jurisdiction. And I think in the space of the internet, again, it makes it more difficult for people to be able to demonstrate. So if there's an international, or using an example, the Daily Mail as a newspaper, it's now largely outside the UK readership, that even if it published something that was untrue and harmful, in fact to the point of serious harm, you couldn't sue within this jurisdiction if it could be shown that the readership was greater outside the UK than inside the UK. So those are two issues I think that concerned individuals who have been defamed in the past, around the difficulty of an individual in protecting their reputation. There's also then there are other arguments around the freedom of the press and how much the press can intrude on those issues. And I know that we've had some of those recently, even within the Assembly, in terms of that line about the appropriate public interest and all of that. So I think there are significant issues. I don't think it's just a case of just following on from the England and Wales bill. I think there are serious issues to consider. Sorry, I know Paul, you wanted, but I think Jim had indicated first.
Just a couple of comments. The departmental briefing paper surprised me in one respect, because it talks extensively about the Defamation Act of 2013 in England and Wales and how that changed the common law. It succeeds in writing a paper which doesn't reveal the fact that we, of course, have our own statute. We have the 1955 Act, the Defamation Act, which rather surprising the paper didn't deal with that. The other issue that I've sort of been turning over in my mind: how does the minister handle bringing forward legislation in which he might be conflicted, given his public declarations of interest, of connections to publication? So I'm just wondering how a minister handles that situation, where there could be a perception, at least, of conflict.
I think it's very clear, particularly the strongest lobbies about this, and I think that's been very clear for the last number of years. The strongest lobby for change had been around the publishers,
yes,
and the media, and I think that actually gave rise to the origins of looking at this issue again. Clearly the minister is, as I understand it, still a director in a company which is around publishing.
Absolutely.
So clearly there is an interest there, and I think if we're trying to balance the rights of an individual who has been defamed under our current, but an individual which an untrue thing causing harm has been said or published, versus the rights of publishers, then I think it does become potentially an issue. So we could include that we could include that question in the letter as to whether or not he considers himself to be conflicted in this. It's hard to see how he would not be if he maintains the director position.
And does a minister then have the facility to have a colleague introduce legislation? Or does it have to be from the minister of that department?
My understanding would be, certainly there has been a case where ministers have moved legislation on behalf of a different department,
Yes,
but
yes. But that might be just because they weren't there. But
largely, I think,
yes.
We could certainly look into that and find out. Sorry, I know Claire, I think you'd indicate.
So just to finish that point, maybe that's an indication that this really would be better handled by private member legislation.
Well, I think this has been kicking around for a very long time, and I think there isn't a great understanding as to why it wasn't. The legislation wasn't introduced here when it was in England and Wales, and I'm still not entirely sure what the reasons for that were. They may very well be concerns, and you've outlined, and you've considerably more legal experience. But I suppose that is, and if parties or individuals have proposals on those, I think bringing it through the legislative process is the way to do it and to make amendments. And I think there was very good work done by Philip's constituency colleague on a private member's bill, so that might be the function. But I think it's probably time to stop, either blocking it. And I would support Philip's proposal to write to the minister and ask if he's going to bring it forward, and if he is, well and good, let's get it through, but not to continue to occupy the space and
But I think what's interesting
allow PMB through.
in relation to the Dr. Andrew Scott paper is, there are clearly issues in the law that probably are not controversial and do require clarity. I think it is an interesting one because a lot of the coverage of this issue has been covered by the newspapers and by those with a vested interest in a particular angle on this. So sometimes I think we do need to be a little careful about that, as to, you know, looking at both sides of the argument.
Transparency is
But again, you know, something that this committee could look at in due course, if it was minded to have some involvement in that. Paul?
Just on the wars, we did have a number of evidence sessions previously in relation to this matter, where some fairly prominent barristers were brought in to give us advice and guidance and whatever in relation to the point where what was deemed to be serious fact, the determination of what was serious is really where there was a problem, because one person could see somebody having a go at them, and defamation, not as really run like water off a duck's back, and another person that might be extremely annoying to them, and to the degree where they could suffer from serious mental problems associated with it, whereas somebody else, you could say whatever you like about them, it doesn't seem to have any effect upon them. And it was the determination as to what was serious and what wasn't, you know. Yeah. And there was definitely a very strong argument being put forward by one fairly prominent barrister who seems to take on quite a few of these cases from all over the world.
Well, what might be useful actually would be that if we get the transcript, if there are those available from the evidence sessions from the last, because although you were there, you'd been on the committee in the last mandate, and I know a number of members won't have had that opportunity.
Well, he actually brought forward a very nice line. He thought we actually could set up a nice industry in Northern Ireland where we could become the centre for people to take defamation cases.
We could also potentially access the written briefings from the previous as well, which might be useful. So perhaps if we get that and we circulate that to members, I think, you know, I suppose we are all in an unusual situation that a number of us will have been defamed or have had untrue things said on social media and other things in the past. And, you know, I think even from talking to people who have suffered harm and lies, you know, and their frustrations, you know, you would get a sense from the media that it's really easy to take a defamation case. And yet when you talk to people who have suffered that, it is expensive, it is difficult, even under our current system. The proposed law in England and Wales makes it easier for publishers to defend and harder for a person to take a case, and we need to be aware of that, you know, we are talking about the balance of rights there. John, sorry, I'd indicated just
I think it's worth noting that this change of legislation was delayed by two ministers who were not publishers, to the best of my knowledge. So I don't think we should
two ministers have been defamed in the past.
Cast aspersion upon the current minister who's currently working his way through his brief. I've no difficulty in sense of writing to the minister and asking about what his plans are for this bill going forward in the future. Though in regards a perceived conflict of interest, the perceived conflict of interest will be managed through the ministerial code and other stated guidance and legislation that's already in place. He will not be the first minister, nor will he be the last minister who has a conflict of interest in regards to legislation. And it's worth noting that the final decision makers in regards to what shape their legislation will take will be the Assembly. So it'll be members of the Assembly who will vote.
Someone uses royal prerogative.
Or somebody uses royal prerogative. But it'll be the Assembly which decides the final.
I would have a sense that this wouldn't be an issue that would apply to Jim, to be fair.
You never know.
I think Jim knows that.
Yes. So, Jim Wells?
Just to say, I've recently served 3 writs, about to serve another one, and issued further 2, so therefore I won't be taking part in any of these discussions.
Can I just ask about the previous evidence sessions? How are we going to receive that?
We can provide the official reports, and there's a range of stakeholders, including academics and also medical professionals who the former committee had taken evidence from, so we could provide the official reports of those to members.
And it's entirely up to members whether they'd like to receive those via email or in their meeting packs for consideration at a future meeting.
Okay. I don't want to be Job's comforter, Jim, but I think, you know, it is pretty well regarded that the only way to make a small fortune in defamation claims is to start with a large one. So we'll note that when we consider once we receive the further briefing, and we can get a sense from the minister then in what direction and when he is likely to bring something forward in relation to that.
Sure, members content then to have that information emailed to them?
Yep. Everybody content? Okay. Okay, so moving on to
We're going to write to the minister.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Write to the minister, and we're going to ask him what his intentions are. When is it likely to happen? When is it likely to come before us? Does he consider himself to be conflicted? And if he does or doesn't, what does he intend to do about it? Okay. Moving on, then there's a research paper in relation to what works centres. Refer members to the briefing paper from research on pages 19 to 24 of your main pack. And I welcome Eileen Reagan from research. And I would like to invite you to make a short opening statement in relation to the paper.
First of all, it's Regan, not Reagan. No relation to Ronnie. Thanks. The What Works Centres, very briefly, is just to give you a quick overview of what the initiative is that came out of Cabinet Office, and then how it has featured across Great Britain, and then also to give you some initial considerations for Northern Ireland. So the initiative dates back for some time. 2011 was when the first What Works Centre was opened. Basically, what they are to prioritise evidence in decision making. So it aims to improve how government and other organisations generate, share and use independent, robust, reliable and relevant evidence to inform its decisions, but also to support more efficient and effective service delivery across all the public sector, both at the national and subnational levels, including local. So it's based on a principle that good decision makers are best informed by high quality evidence, and where such evidence is unavailable, they should use high quality methods in order to create or establish such evidence, basically to establish what works, hence the name What Works Centres. So how they do this is in a combination of ways. The Cabinet Office initiative proposed and then implemented was to collate, produce, assess, share, encourage. Basically, it's about generating and sharing information in a very accessible way and widely as possible. And it's supposed to test variations in maybe evidence or in approaches, to vigorously evaluate programs or policies or law that exists, as well as to stop things that don't exist, that don't work effectively. So a network was established across a number of policy areas, and at the moment there's 7 What Works centres in England, and there's 2 affiliate What Works centres in Scotland, and the other is in Wales. As you can see from your paper there at pages 3 to 5, I outlined so you can dip in and out of the What Works centres to see what it is they are in fact doing. But to give you an example of the policy areas covered: health and social care, crime reduction, early intervention, educational attainment, local economic growth, improved quality for older people, community well-being, employment and learning, culture and sport. In the 2 devolved regions of Scotland and Wales, it works across a range of issues. And more recently, in Wales, they've particularly focused on poverty to address it. And in Scotland, they chose to set up a centre that looks specifically at public service development and reform, working with community planning partnerships. From what I've looked at so far, it appears that all of them receive funding from Cabinet, either through Whitehall Department or through, say, the Scottish Government, and they may receive money from the ESRC, and another source of funding is from the big lottery. I have some figures on the initial funding that they received, but it's been very hard to ascertain what exactly they're spending year on year. We can drill into that more, but for example, the What Works Centre for Crime Reduction, which is in England, it received 3.28 million over a 3-year period. 80% of it came from the College of Policing and ESRC, and there's a university consortium that's going to provide the other 20%. Another one, the Sutton Trust Educational Endowment Foundation, they had a founding grant of 125 million, and it was all coming from the Whitehall Department of Education. The Public Policy Institute for Wales That receives ESRC funding and Welsh Government monies, and it has a budget, an annual budget. The only one that we've been able to identify an annual budget on of $450,000 per year. Most of them are working, from what I understand, or nearly all of them are working largely with the executive side of government, and only on a rarer occasion is there some interaction between the centres and the parliaments. We had a roundtable discussion here in the Assembly last January, which was organised through RAISE and working with some people in the executive, as well as the Alliance for Useful Evidence, to just initiate a discussion about a What Works Centre for Northern Ireland. It came out of the project here in the Assembly, the Knowledge Exchange Seminar Series, which is all about trying to promote evidence-led policy making and lawmaking. A number of issues were discussed. There were a number of interested stakeholders there. No decisions reached. But one thing I think there was consensus around the table was that there's no point in creating another centre if it's just going to produce more of the same and not add any real value. So if this is going to be seriously thought about, it has to be, there has to be an initial examination to identify the gaps so that we can figure out how to best fill them for the purposes of Northern Ireland, especially when we're in a culture of austerity at the moment. And the other thing to note that came out of those discussions is there are a number of areas which will probably lend themselves towards working with this type of a centre. And one is particularly in identifying where there's data gaps in the evidence, because if there isn't data, it restricts what we can and can't do. But while you're thinking about this issue for future, there's 3 areas that I would say are worth looking at whilst you further deliberate about it. Is post the European referendum, we know that we're going to have to figure out a position for Northern Ireland, figuring out how we can best inform ourselves as to how Northern Ireland's budgetary, fiscal and economic needs are going to be best met. It's an area maybe down the road that something like this type of initiative could have some input into. Also the area of fiscal devolution in terms of figuring out block grant adjustments. There is such opaqueness about the data and problems with the modelling, but it's another area that potentially an initiative like this could help to advance and inform the Northern Ireland position. And another area is in relation to the PFG. If we are going to have outcomes and indicators and it's going to align in the budget in some way, it may be an area where there can be identification and closure of data gaps that currently exist. So it's a very open discussion at the moment.
Thank you very much for that. I suppose where I see the opportunity really with this is that, you know, I think if you look at the programme for government, you listen to a lot of the conversations that are ongoing around public policy making and policy development. I think we are moving much more into the space of this evidence-based, outcomes-focused approach. I think it's fine. I think that's now into the narrative, that's into the conversation around all of this, but I think it's important that we actually say what does that mean and what's underpinning that. So instead of just using the language and using the frameworks, is to really, I suppose, move into the space of how do we, as in departments, how do we, in terms of advising and scrutinising government, ensure that there is this evidence-based good policy that effectively is, and I think that when you say sort of in the context of austerity, in my mind this is an invest to save type approach, because ultimately the solutions, the evidence-based being identified, the analysis of that, the identification of possible solutions based on best practice and the implementation of that should mean a better system and a process of delivering public services which should be more efficient without impacting on the level of service. So to me, it makes a lot of sense, not just on those general issues that you have raised, but very particularly from our point of view as a Finance Committee, because the Department of Finance has that role around trying to ensure sort of public sector reform. So I think it's very relevant to how we're doing business and how we do business better, potentially. You mentioned that there's the 7 centres in England and there's the 2 affiliates in Scotland and Wales, but none in Northern Ireland at the moment. Was your sense that you mentioned there, for example, on the crime and policing, that a large part of that came from College of Policing?
Yeah.
Do you get a sense that this was funded by Cabinet Office and through those sources? So, for example, in the Scottish one, is that funded by Cabinet Office, given to the Scottish Government, which is then passed on to fund this? Or is this the Scottish Government and Executive themselves funding?
I understand the money is provided directly to the Scottish Government, and then the Scottish Government decides how to spend it. But in addition to that, the ESRC money, they choose how to spend the money, and some of that money is obviously coming from Cabinet as well. Whereas,
just trying to identify whether if this is an initiative right across everywhere else, including one in Scotland and Wales, has been funded by Cabinet Office, and yet we don't have it here, there may actually not be a cost or any significant cost to Northern Ireland Executive if this was established, because it would be additionality.
I understand from the January discussions where there was a Cabinet Office person present that they're very interested in what Northern Ireland would like to do, and this issue has been raised previously about a centre in Northern Ireland, and the ESRC is also very supportive of the idea of one in Northern Ireland too.
Just one more question, and I'll open it up to everybody else. But there's clearly 2 different types of centres. One is very issue specific, and the affiliates in particular seem to be more general, and whatever tasks they're given they can look at. Is there a sense that those ones based in England that are area specific, that they work to everyone in the UK? So if we were to approach them, for example, on early intervention or on an educational issue, is that something that they would also supply support and help to Northern Ireland Executive? Or are they mainly working just to, for example, if you're based in England, are they working to England or a particular customer, for the want of a better term, over there?
Well, the projects are defined, and they're defined by the centre itself, but anybody can avail of the research. So I would think that this committee or any committee could contact any of the centres to seek the research findings.
And in terms of the work that they carry out, is it by, do you get a sense that, you may not know the answer to this, but we could look into it, but is it by request by? So if government comes, maybe central government comes with a particular challenge or an issue that they want the centre to look at, or have you got a sense that it's generated more by the centre themselves in terms of their areas of work?
I understand that it's generated more by the centre themselves with support of Cabinet Office, as well as there's a What Works National Advisor, Dr. David Halpern, I think, is in that position at the moment, and he's responsible for developing the network itself. But they set up projects, and the projects, involve some of them longitudinal studies, so they're over a period of time. If it's helpful, I could generate a list of the nature of the projects, but I think that Wales works a little bit differently in that they're very closely aligned with the government there. So there's a bit more back and forth and on a more regular basis. I think they have specific projects, but I think there's an ad hoc nature to it as well. So it's it's a fantastic opportunity in that something could be identified that would fill a gap in the production of evidence to date, but you would want to look very carefully about what that gap is, and what you're going to do.
I think it is interesting though, because I think most analysis would say that Northern Ireland in particular is very poorly served in terms of the think tank type or the outside of government. Generating ideas and advice and different things, probably by virtue of the fact that we're relatively small, but comparative to England and Wales, for example. So, I think that there has been sort of a discussion before about, that there is a gap there. I suppose it is about getting clarity about what exactly that looks like.
And about drilling into the data gaps particularly.
Okay, Philip.
Well, thanks, Chair. Thank you, Ellen, for your paper. I had a look at some of the What Works centres, and the Welsh one in particular looked quite good. And for example, I went into a paper they did in local government, which was a very, very good paper about transforming local government. But I suppose the question to you is, the research was a good read, and there was lots of good stuff in it. But is there any? I couldn't see any evidence of the application. So, okay, we've all these good ideas, and where's it going? Has it been applied anywhere? What's the output? And I know in your paper, the Cabinet Office, you quote talking about getting a step change in government. So where's the evidence that beyond all the good information they're producing, that something's actually coming out the other end of this process to impact on people's lives and on government?
Chair, I think that's an important question to ask. And in the Cabinet report itself, it's almost that the period is too short to see real impact, because most of the projects still haven't come to conclusion. But again, if something is going to be defined for Northern Ireland, measuring impact must be a part of the delivery of such a centre. Otherwise, we just have more of the same, where there good research comes forward, but identifying an impact from it.
I mean, certainly I think that having somewhere, as you say, Chair, because of our size, we don't have certainly specific research to the level they would in London, for example. So anything that could provide that on an open basis so that everybody has access to it, I think would be very useful. But I think the challenge is taking it beyond just a think tank, and you know, you just go on the website of any of the think tanks and you can see oodles of documents. The question is how many of them actually generate ideas that can be applied and then get a return on the research. So I think that's the challenge, is how do we put a process in place that makes it impactful rather than just another exercise in academia.
I think that is, you know, it was one of the aspects that appealed, other than, for example, some of the academic research or think tank, and that you tend to get perhaps a particular perspective coming through, and we can see that we do have a lot of reports and research that back up particular views on one side or the other. And I think the idea about these was almost that they inhabited more of a neutral ground of simply looking at the evidence and being evidence-led as opposed to any political ideology on either side. But
on that point particularly, if there is going to be impact, you have, I would think, a model, or I would respectfully suggest that the model must embed in some way governance here, you know, either the executive end or the legislative arm of government, because unless you embed it, then you're not ensuring that that information and data is coming before the decision makers. And some of the KES initiative, that's what we try to do. We bring the chairs from the committees into the seminars so that you show the relevance of the research to what the committee considers. And it's about trying to figure out a model that would enable that in order to try and affect impact. But politics will always be a feature within all of this, obviously.
Okay, John?
In terms of the Sutton Trust, during my time in the Department of Education, we did use some of their research and actually circulated it to boards of governors in relation to how to tackle educational underachievement and good governance, etc. So, did you say they were funded by the government to the tune of £125 million?
For the Welsh
Sutton Trust?
Sutton Trust has 125 million founding grant, and monies from the information that's available to me. It's from the Whitehall Department for Education.
What do you do with that?
And I didn't realise they were on that scale, though I find their work very interesting, and they're clearly it's data, research, etc. But as you say, and others have said, a political opinion will decide what you do with the information in front of you. But I'm sorry I didn't use them more now. I didn't realise how much they were funded.
But that's why I was wondering, you know, if they are funded centrally, if all of these centres are funded centrally from the Cabinet Office, and they're doing some work, but perhaps they've looked at the English and whatever, you know, I know the educational underachievement was a big one that they were looking at. You know, I just wonder then, surely we should also have an opportunity to say, here's a specific set of issues here, you know, that we should also prevail off some of that, because it is central government and it's above and beyond the likes of what we get in foreign consequences, etc. It's something that should be for everybody, not just where it's located.
Chair, if I could, I would just respectfully say as well, politics will govern at the end of the day, but it shouldn't discourage us or dissuade us from trying to work towards evidence-led policy and lawmaking. So we have sound.
Sort of the suggestion that the two are opposing concepts.
But often are.
Okay, is there any... Jerry?
Just a simple question. Would the existing centres, would they share information? Would they collaborate? on certain projects, or are they totally independent? And I'm just trying to establish if there's any level of duplication or...
Chair, I would say that because they are working, generally speaking, the ones in England in very distinct areas, there probably isn't that much duplication, but I can't be certain of that. I would think that because they belong to a network, they're talking amongst one another. I do know that the Welsh What Works Centre, that they do engage with the other centres, and the Scottish one does too, and that in part is because of its size and because they're affiliate WWCs.
Yeah. Would there be a central database where one can use the information, or isn't that from the other, from work that's already established?
Yeah, Chair, from what I understand, there isn't one that's publicly accessible. I mean, engaging with the Cabinet Office probably would be a good way of further demystifying, you know, what kind of source materials. But you can go on each of the websites for the centres, and they try to be as open and transparent as possible with their findings.
One option may be that we could write to Cabinet Office and ask them about the funding arrangements for the existing centres and you know, what projects are undertaken, to get a better sense about. We could do that if we can get a response.
I'm not just totally sold on the idea, and appreciate that there's maybe good ideas. Chasing money because it's there, it's not always just the right thing to do. And I understand that, you know, there's probably difficulties in not doing it. I want to see where the outcomes of these types of bodies are set up, and they're not just a way of a lot of academics getting themselves pay for the next number of years until it disappears, and then they end up sucked back into the greater civil service, and that's what does happen.
But I think
irrespective of what goes on, I genuinely believe common sense is sometimes lacking on a lot of occasions. We don't always seem to, you know, we all know what needs to be done in many areas, but it's getting around to getting it done is the point. And sometimes using this money better might be a better idea. I just don't know. I'm just not seeing that.
I think the theory of it, like I do, I like the concept of it, and I like it for the reason that I think that anything that helps policy development, you know, we do have teams of civil servants within departments, you know, talking to stakeholders, talking to end users, looking at the research and trying to develop policy. But
do we not do that? Do we not?
We do it
that?
at the minute.
We should be doing that.
But I think the difficulty is it can be challenging, I think, in terms of creativity or innovation, or being able to capture
I want to bring new ideas in.
an idea
Don't do that.
of what is happening
Change.
elsewhere. So, like, if you take education underachievement as a good example, like, there's some really good initiatives internationally, and they have an evidence base to be proven to have worked. But, you know, we are relying on maybe a small team of officials within the Department of Education or wherever else knowing about that, or somebody bringing it to their attention, or their research flagging that up, being able to persuade others about that, being able to persuade the minister of that. So I think I'm just using this example of, you know, this idea of looking at what works, which is why they're called what works, and if something works and it's proven to have worked, then that should influence our policy development work. I think it is supposed to have a very practical application. So if you have a particular, you can see sort of, you know, we're obviously going to talk about rates, but, you know, with the rate system, or you have a particular challenge, you know, and then you look at the evidence, you follow the evidence, you come up with a solution which is supposed to be, you know, more efficient, more effective, produce a better outcome. So that's very much at the heart of it. But I accept what you say, Paul, that the big danger in all of these is that they become almost just an academic exercise, literally an academic exercise, and it doesn't have any impact anywhere.
That's the point.
Okay. Any further questions just before? Okay. Well, thank you, Eileen. Much appreciated. And we will. So I think if we write to the Cabinet Office, I think in the first instance try to find out how much money these get and what opportunities there may be. I think the other benefit potentially is because these are funded, accepting Paul's point about chasing the money, but if they are funded centrally, so there's no additional cost to us, and it may produce better policy making. I think there's a possible win-win there for us. So. Okay, so moving on then to non-domestic rates, small business rate relief.
This is an important one.
So this is just a written briefing, pages 26 to 59 of your main pack. If any members want to raise any issues at this point?
Chair, I know you met with the Minister as part of the briefing about deciding on future work programmes. And one of the things issued in your note, if I recall, was that you had a conversation around non-domestic rates and some of the things that he potentially was minded to bring forward, especially around the small business rate relief, which I note is due to expire in March 17. And I know he has thoughts about replacing that with an amended version. I think from memory he's also had thoughts about removing maybe some of the rate relief for vacant properties. And certainly the one thing that struck me was the size of the current batch of reliefs that currently exist versus the overall rates take. It's about, what, 592 million, yet a substantial portion of that, or of additional funds, are gone in various reliefs. And I suppose I was just to ask if the Minister had provided any more detail about what he was be minded to do around that. I think going forward, it's 221 million, I think, from the paper that says in various reliefs that currently exist, which is more or less near enough the same amount that the councils raise from rates in Northern Ireland. So it is a sizable dollop, and that's not to talk against any of the reliefs that are there. Many of them on their own are there for good reason. But I say it was just to get some feedback from you from your conversation, whether he had any more detailed thoughts that weren't in that couple of notes in your paper.
It was a fairly brief, obviously we covered a whole range of issues, and I think they were summarised succinctly by Jim. It seemed to be more, he was saying that he's looking at this issue. He referenced the derelict property or empty site issue, but it seemed to indicate that he was going to come forward with some ideas relatively quickly to us on that. It may be an opportunity when he comes to us in terms of his next evidence session, which hopefully should happen relatively soon. It may be an opportunity actually to raise this with him. He mentioned, looking at how best to do it, looking specifically at raising additional through the derelict. I also understand, and I think we should write to him for clarity about this, that he made some comments at an event on Monday, it was on Monday morning, in relation to having no intention to look at rate support for larger retailers, which I think has caused a little bit of concern through the sector. So it may be worth us trying to find out a bit more information about that, because if he's coming out with quite a definitive statement on Monday, he clearly hasn't consulted with us about that. But it does appear that he made comments about that. So, we do have a number of large retailers as well, the Tesco's, Asda's, Sainsbury's, and, I know that they have, I'm sure they've contacted all of us as well in relation to some of their concerns about that. But it would just be useful to find out. He clearly is working on this if he's making some statements about what he's not going to do as well as what he's looking at. But I think the Minister is intending to come and see us. I'm not sure if we've received a communication.
Well, informally, I think he's coming probably the week after next, but we haven't formalised that yet, Chair.
Is that dealing with the issue we invited them on coaching?
Yeah.
The week after next?
Week after next, we think.
Do members want to cover a range of issues, to request to cover a range of issues?
I think it would be logical when he's coming along, he may...
Don't want issues to get squeezed out by too much on the agenda.
Well, we could. We can play it by ear about how long a question will take in terms of that particular issue, and then see if there's any further issues members want to. Sorry, Jim.
I'm just arguing with Jim on this. I'd be slightly worried. I mean, I suspect that issue in the coaching, there's many serious issues the Minister has to answer. Certainly, myself being on the previous committee, have many questions to ask, and I wouldn't like the excuse to be used. I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I have to leave this. I want to move on to the rates of golf clubs or something,
No, and that wouldn't be allowed to happen in the sense of he's coming here to talk primarily about the one issue. So it's really just in terms of the time. So if
how long do we have of them?
Well, generally speaking, they do attend for about an hour.
Well, I mean, on a previous session, it took us 3 hours to deal with a Minister.
Chair, I think the Minister said that there would be an hour available from 2 o'clock.
But members, it's up to members what questions you want to ask. So he's coming on primarily on that issue. So I presume that's where members want to focus their questions. All I'm saying is that it may provide some opportunity as well at that time. But I'm sure, I'm sure we can invite him again. Like, we will invite him again on this particular issue. Like, I'm not sure if we will receive. I presume we're not going to receive information about what he's doing on rates between now and his appearance. If we do, we can schedule another session with him, particularly on that paper.
I must say, Chair, I think 1 hour to deal with the major issue that has arisen in the Cushing matter is very optimistic, because even if every member was to ask, that's only about 5 minutes each, which, when you take the answering time out, isn't very much.
Well, all we can do, Jim, is request. So ultimately, if we are in the middle of the evidence session and the Minister's indicating he has no further time, all we can do is try to reschedule for him to come back. Otherwise, we can say we want him for 2 hours and wait for him to come back just to say when he can do that. What do members prefer?
Well, has he already stipulated he's only available for 1 hour, or have we asked him for 1 hour?
No, we didn't ask him for 1 hour. We've asked him to come along. So
We've asked him for 2 hours.
he's indicating that he can come along. The indication seemed to be he can come along Wednesday after next. But he was indicating, but it wouldn't be unusual for ministers to indicate that they have an hour.
It was indicated that the Minister has an hour and that he has another engagement.
Well, he
After that.
can cancel that engagement because this is crucial. We need him for 2 hours. This is far more important than anything the Minister has.
Do you know what his other engagement is?
I'm sure it can't be more important. It's probably
Going to the dentist, okay?
fine. Well, he can cancel that because this is one of the most serious issues that this committee is dealing with, and he should give it 2 hours.
Well, look, if members feel it's going to take 2 hours, we can easily write to the Minister and say we feel that this is going to take 2 hours. Now, be aware that if the Minister's saying that he's a further engagement, he could come back and say to us, well, look, I have only 1 hour on that particular date, but I will try to reschedule at a time on which I have 2 hours. So that's what
Oh, we don't want to push back indefinitely, so I think
No, look, I don't think
we
so.
take him for as long as we can the first day and bring him back if needs be.
That would be my inclination, yes.
But
Yeah.
I hope he could stretch a point and stay with us the requisite time.
I think in terms of the issue that you're referring to, and I suppose the matters arising from it, that definitely would take the go. But around the rates, that's what I just wanted to clarify. There's clearly a big body of work, and I think it came up very clearly in the planning that it was a priority. And even I thought that report was really interesting and good to pull a lot of those statistics together. And it did ask some interesting questions in terms of, we're all saying we want to raise more from but nobody is prepared to drop any of the exemptions. I was a little bit offended that said the public consultation had no good ideas. So those of us who submitted to it can face up. But that's what I just wanted some guidance on when we would be discussing that more substantially, because I don't think we can, with the best will in the world, if we was here for 5 hours, we couldn't get our discussion and our body of work on rates in. So
I think it's going to come up in our planning session after this.
It is, Chair, yes.
So, I think my sense is that it's coming from everybody that this is an issue of
it's a
great
very
interest.
the fact is, it's the one tool the Northern Ireland already has control, which is why we ripped the back out of it and why we've probably overused it. But it's one that we have to get right because it is the fiscal lever that we currently have at our disposal. So.
Now, look, there's clearly a great deal of interest on the issue of business rates, and I think everybody is keen. I think it was clear from our strategic planning day that everybody is keen to look at what fiscal levers we can use to encourage and protect economic activity and growth. But it's also coming from the department's point of view, clear indication that this is also a priority for them. So I think that the issues will come together. I suppose in terms of our substantive consideration, it'll probably come after a paper, if a paper is going to come quickly. We can try to find out from the department as to when he is likely to consider that and when we are likely to get that information, because that might be best to schedule some of this around that and further officials to come and give evidence at that point. Philip?
Chair, just on the Minister, again, I take on board everybody's views that the priority here is to get him to respond to coaching, but there's obviously a timing issue around the rates, which we've discussed. Another issue that would be really useful to get the Minister's view on is the one-year budget. Because again, that's the Deputy First Minister said at questions this week that it was an official executive policy. Now, he didn't specify revenue on capital, and we suspect the capital is going to be a 4-year and the revenue 1. But again, it would be useful to get the Minister's view on this and the whys and wherefores, because it is a substantial issue. So I think, those 3 issues alone, I think would keep him well occupied for more than an hour.
Well, I think, my sense then is that the Minister knows that he's been invited to come and speak about the issue around coaching. I think we make it clear that, you know, that is what he's here to do, and obviously he is to address if he's making some short opening statements. Given that he's indicated an hour again, I think we should emphasise in our correspondence that his opening statement should be brief to enable members maximum time to question. You know, again then, ultimately, if people feel that they personally have exhausted their questions on that, or others have, in the time frame that we have, it may be an opportunity to raise some of those issues, but I do think that we want him to focus on the fact that it is about the coaching issues that he's coming along for. On the other point about him indicating an hour, I think, you know, given if he is going to come Wednesday week, I think it's better to have him here and try to maximise that time. And if we run out of time, to ask him to come back, then to say to him, like, we require you for 2 hours, and then we'll just wait for a 2 hour slot to open up. Ultimately, you know, unless, in fact, ultimately, full stop, this is an issue for the Minister. All we can do is request, Jim, so, you know, that's what we'll request. I think we should put in the correspondence so that we anticipate it should take over an hour, but we want to maximise the amount of time that he can spend with us, given the number of questions that are there. Everybody broadly content with that approach, Sir Jerry?
Chair, I'm just looking at the diagram here in terms of the cost, you know, from the rates relief. And I guess one is 30 million for the religious organisations. I'm just wondering, because just for my own benefit, does that include all the estates, you know, belonging to the religious organisations, including their churches, their residentials, everything?
That's my understanding, but again, we can seek some clarity about that. I think the concept of how much money that's in an exemption is a strange one, in the sense of it's actually non-existent funds, if that makes sense. It's what they don't get from you as opposed to what they're giving you. So I suppose we need to be a little bit careful, you know, there. It's not as if this money has been paid out to them, it's just that it's simply not being raised from them.
Yeah.
You know, it'd be no different for me to say, you know, I'm
Still
taxing you
cost.
80%,
Yeah.
but you're only going to pay 40%, and therefore, you know, you've cost us the 40% amount. You know, it is notional in that sense. I think the issue about rates is that the fact that for every relief, that has to be picked up by somebody else, because the total amount of rates is set initially. And I think that's a bit of concern. A lot of people that we've spoken to, even so far, I'm sure all members are the same, is that people are looking for their exemptions or reliefs or incentives, but
Nobody's
there's
offering
no
to pay
suggestions about who, sometimes who should be paying more. So, sorry, Paul?
Yeah, just on that, and it's to come back on that point, because some religious organisations run residential and nursing homes as business opportunities, but they're under the auspice of a church. If it's registered as a church, they avail of it, which means then it's an unfair playing field for commercial operators who are running a nursing home and paying for that. They have to pay, they pay commercial rates on it, yet they're competing with a nursing home, which, and I happen to know one in particular that's run by a church, and I'm just wondering, are they availing of?
Papers seem to indicate, though, that my understanding is that nursing homes are exempt, regardless of whether they're not for profit. So, you know, so it doesn't matter if it's a commercial nursing home, they are also exempt for rates. I feel like I should sort of ask the witnesses that are not witnesses at the back, but that is my understanding. But
Okay.
I can see the point in terms of maybe some other commercial enterprises that where another exemption wouldn't apply. Yeah, so I think perhaps do members want to write, you can either write to ask more detail, particularly about the religious aspect of it, or we can wait until we call a witness on the general issue and we can ask some questions on that then. Any preference? Perhaps if we wait until we get some further information.
Yeah.
Just to clarify, Chair, I'm not just picking on religious organisations here.
I think it's too late, that's going
Is it-
to
There's the education sector as
Yeah.
well. Just,
Yeah.
You know, it's just for clarity, as to get relief on. Per se.
Okay. Well, we'll just move on then to the Programme for Government, Construction Employers Federation, response to the Northern Ireland Executive's draft Programme for Government Framework. This has been sent through to us, just some information in relation to their views, consultation response. It's really there to note. Do members have any issues they want to raise on that paper at this stage? Nope. Okay. So moving on then to the subordinate legislation SL1, the rates, brackets, increase reduction for recreational rediments, close brackets regulations, brackets Northern Ireland, close bracket 2016. I'd refer members to the following papers. There's a covering note of page 77 of the main pack. SL1, the rates regulations, is contained in page 78 to 80 of the main pack. There's an email from the Department of Finance regarding SL1 and rates regulations, pages 81 to 82 of the main pack. Department of Finance letter regarding Edenmore Country Club and rating, which sort of touched a little bit on what we've been talking about there, in page 83 to 86. Touching on the profit, not for profit aspect, or amateur or other. And I want to welcome Mr. Andrew McAvoy. And also Brian McClure. This may have been a mistake, Brian, that you turned up because
I couldn't make it. I couldn't make it last week.
It wasn't on my notes that you were going to take the witness stand, but maybe an opportunity for members to ask you some questions about rates then. Okay, so I'd like to invite the witness or witnesses to make a short opening statement if you so wish.
I must say, we don't really wish to make a statement. We're here to answer your questions. So, this is a follow-up from last week, so that's what we're here for.
So you be aware, it's just that this was obviously an issue of considerable interest in the last mandate. Yeah. And we'd considered some of the issues around the proposal. A little bit of concern perhaps it raised just about the occasional licence issue. Although I think we now understand that the occasional licence would be very limited and wouldn't be the same as what would be a licensed, or there would be no capability. I think it's limited to 14, and even the 14 would be unusual in circumstances. So we just wanted members to have the opportunity to consider that over the course of this week, and to have the opportunity then to ask any further questions. I think members did indicate you wanted officials to come back just in case there were any issues that you had. I'm not sure, members, do you have any? Yes, sorry, Jim Wells?
Yeah. The occasional licence issue, which is restricted to 14, do we have stats to know what the uptake is at the moment?
I can get them from the responsible department for you. But
if it's coming in as an average of 3 or 4 a year, or even 6, it wouldn't be really an issue.
Yeah, I mean, it's our understanding it's about 6 occasions a year.
As an average?
As an average, but I'll have to get the facts for you. That's my understanding. It's around that.
I also looked up a bit about it as well after the session and looked up the stuff that we had on it, and there's also a challenge function with regard, the issue was raised last week with regards to occasional licence being granted. Well, there's a function to allow someone to challenge that if they're a neighbouring business or enterprise within the vicinity of the area that the licence has been granted for. So I don't know if that helps.
Well, it would be a very brave person to say there's a huge DA here.
Yeah, I understand.
For them to challenge and alienate half of their members, or half their customers. It
was just added into the mix,
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the policy logic behind that, it's a parity of treatment with community halls, which is the provision of, it replicates, in fact, the provisions regarding licences within the community halls exemption, which has been a fairly long-standing part of the rates order.
Now, last week I raised, and Mr. Logan, who has written to the committee, is a personal friend of the family for 40 years, and I know his club extremely well. And there was a hint dropped last week that there's potential for something to be done to address what they perceive as to be the unequal playing field.
Yep.
In that you could have a propriety-owned golf club, and this is a true situation, and 3 mile up the road you have a member-only owned club, and the member-only club in effect is acting like a commercial business. It has Sunday lunches, it dances, it has communion, dinners, etc. So our teas. Are you in a position to give us any more hint as to what could be happening?
Oh well, certainly this is something we'll need to take forward as part of the business rates review that's ongoing at the moment. And I'm fully aware of the issues, and I have a regular dialogue with Mr. Logan on this. And I have to say I have considerable sympathy for the position he finds himself in regarding his rating treatment compared to that of private members' clubs, or indeed municipal golf clubs, which receive exemption and can charge cut rate fees and undercut proprietary golf clubs. So there's a whole range of issues, including the outworking of the existing policy on the 20% rule, which works to the benefit of Royal Portrush and Royal County Down, whereas they get 80% exemption on the entire premises, including the restaurants and bars, because of a quirk and a shortcoming in the existing legislation. So these are all anomalies we would like to address as part of the business rates review. It's not the subject of the legislation that you're looking at today, but it's a coming attraction. It's something that we definitely want to address because things have changed in recent years. I mean, the law regarding sport and recreation came out of the Lawrence Report in 1977. And that then found itself into legislation in 1978. The sporting world has changed considerably in the interim, and also the social aspect of sport has changed considerably in the interim. And I don't think the legislation is currently fit for purpose, and I think we really need to look at making some amendments to the legislation and remove some of the anomalies that are creating this unfairness. I'm not saying that we will be able to have a completely level playing field in relation to that, but I think there's some things we certainly can do, and we're aware of a number of issues, and Mr. Logan's been very helpful to us in pointing these out. So
that's very welcome, I must say. I'm glad to see that you're now clear as to the point that those 28 clubs are making, and indeed one of them has gone to the wall because it simply can't compete. And I'll give you an example from my own area. There's a golf club that is actually franchised out its catering and social activities, and they pay a fee to the club, and then that caterer quite obviously flogs to death every opportunity to advertise and to market what they're doing. That seems very detached from Willie playing a round of golf and coming in and having a quick drink and a burger, which was the original idea. So I welcome that, and I look forward. Now, the only reason why it's relevant to what you're doing today is that anything that makes that disparity even wider, that makes the playing field even less level in the sense of benefiting a membership-owned club or membership-run clubs, then makes the 28 clubs position even worse. But on that basis, then I'm quite happy to let this proceed.
I mean, we've been deliberately quite cautious of that because of the interaction with the business sector in relation to these measures, and that's why there's the unlicensed provision in that is a stipulation for enhanced relief, in other words, relief to take beyond 80% to 100%, that the club in question has to be unlicensed because of these competition issues. And that came very clearly out of the consultation that we held on the issue, which was a shortcoming of the previous consultations that had taken place.
Yeah, and that's my sense over the course of looking at this over this week, that those licensed premises and others feel that this provision just with the occasion wouldn't be particularly damaging. They would be content with that. Any other members have any questions about this? Okay, well, thank you very much for that information. So that answered everybody's questions.
I mean, we were very eager to talk to the committee about a range of issues, but I'll let the Minister maybe talk to the committee first.
Okay.
We will certainly make ourselves available on a number of occasions to talk you through some of the work that we're doing at the moment.
What he's minded to do, let us know.
Well, thank you very much, Brian and Andrew. Thank you. So just want to ask members then, are you content then with the policy implications of the proposed legislation at this stage? Yes, all content?
Yep.
No, excellent.
Okay.
So do I.
Thank you. So moving on then, pages 88 to 171 of the main pack. It's correspondence, the usual table. Any members, any comments about any of that correspondence? Okay, if we're content, we'll move.
Members content with the suggested actions then for the correspondence?
Yeah, is everybody content? Yeah. Okay. Moving on to the forward work programme. The forward work programme is at pages 173 to 176 in the main pack, may be impacted or influenced by our short planning meeting after this one. So, once we change that, depending on that, we will circulate the revised. But any comments on that one at the moment? No, everybody happy? Okay, moving on to any other business. Any members of any other business you want to raise? No? Okay, so date, time and place for next meeting. So the next meeting will be Wednesday the 28th of September 2016, room 29, Parliament Buildings at 2 p.m. So I will put the question to the committee that we now adjourn. Okay, so the meeting is now